Can you tell us a little bit about how Lindy Hop, the origins of Lindy Hop, how it came about, when it was first, if there's a date that you can point to or an experience that you can point to of when it began, and talk briefly about its evolution?
Well, I suppose the most obvious thing to be said is that there's division of opinion on this. And I talked to quite a few people, leading members on the swing scene about it. And I'd say the majority of opinion is that somehow or other the Lindy evolved out of the Charleston. This is what most people tell me. And somehow, somewhere along the line, it sort of morphed into a recognisable Lindy Hop. And Shorty Snowden is generally credited with giving it its name. I personally think that's wrong, but I'm saying that because it does seem to be the majority of opinion, and I go along with the argument of this writer Joel Dinnerstein, who makes the point that this was the first modern dance, Black American modern dance, in the sense that it was a response by it was a response by rural migrants coming from the Deep South to New York City, encountering a modern city, and one of the first modern cities, of course, and the high speed and intensity of daily life, and really they were dealing with that, So whereas most of the previous dances have got quite identifiable, sort of like if not animal references, certainly rural references to them. This was not like that. And although I don't think there's a lot of accuracy in the fact that the dance is claimed to be named after Charles Lindbergh's flight, the popularity of the later popularity of the association tends to suggest to me that there's a popular recognition of the fact that there's something intensely mechanical and urban and modern about it, and the fact that they seem to think that the dance was a recognition of Lindbergh's flight. I mean, again, the problem with that argument is, having checked out all the newspapers and sources and talked to people from early days and all the rest of it, there doesn't seem to be any evidence to support it, No one in Harlem was interested in Charles Lindbergh, when he flew the Atlantic. They were celebrating downtown. Of course they were absolutely bananas. I think it was record numbers of ticker tape, were thrown on him, when he, was it Fifth Avenue he would have paraded up, I guess. But whatever avenue they paraded up, yeah, I mean, they said there was the more ticker tape, about 3 times as much ticker tape thrown at Lindbergh as they threw for the Victory Parade at the end of the First World War. So, I mean, it was just phenomenal, the response downtown, but not in Harlem. I mean, nobody was particularly excited about it. So all these stories about people, jumping around and getting excited about him just don't seem to work. But nevertheless, I think it's still a good story, even if you can't get any factual truth in it. It's still a good story, and you can see why, you can understand why. So I think basically it's the dance is about a new assertiveness amongst Harlem's black population, that they were very conscious of being the biggest urban concentration of people of African descent anywhere in the world. There'd never been a black metropolis like Harlem before, and so big, in fact, that it couldn't really come under white domination in the way that black populations, black urban districts were elsewhere in America at that time. And there was a mood, an expectation of a rising standard of living, of equal rights, of everything getting better, and so on. So I think it's all to do with that,
When did the dance, if you were to point to a time when the dance started, and sort of out of what tradition? I think you mentioned before the Shorty Snowden contest as being an identifiable beginning of the dance, but if you could talk a little bit about that, about how the dance began and sort of its musical and dance roots.
Well, the major event was I think it was called the Coloured Dance Marathon at that was his official title, at the Rockland Palace, which originally was called the Manhattan Casino, till the downtown Manhattan casino threatened to sue them, and so they had to change its name to the Rockland Palace. And that was at 155th Street and 8th Avenue, and now it's a parking lot. There's nothing left of it at all. But there are photos of the place that can be seen, and they had this marathon there because at the same time, just prior to June, might have been May, might have been the beginning of June 1928, a dance marathon had been started at Madison Square Gardens, in which everybody was welcome to participate apart from black people. So they held a rival one in Harlem, and with the expressed intention of outdancing the one taking place downtown. And really, that's it emerged in the course of that. Shorty Snowden, by his own Shorty Snowden's account was that he gave 2 or 3. Like you always seem to get this, but I think I tend to go for the accidental one because I think that's more the way that these developments were made rather than any clever conscious intention. Basically, he was doing a sort of breakaway movement. A breakaway is basically where you're holding in a fairly close hold, and you go out to the full extent on one side. Obviously, you keep your guy's left hand and woman's right together, and you swing open on the other side, but still holding. So that's the breakaway. That's as far as the breakaway went, and then you came back together again. So it was just a sort of like a swinging door almost, sort of movement. And the story is that that the partner lost her hold and went staggering, right off backwards, went too far. And Snowden reached out, grabbed her, pulled her back in, and everyone went crazy. They went, wow, what's that? And Snowden and the partner, Mattie Pannell, we should mention her name because she never gets a mention. And as Sugar was saying at the event, you can't Lindy hop on your own. The women are important. Let's do it again. So that's what they did. And that was the beginning of it, because basically, and it was basically getting that something that really lasted 4 beats as opposed to 2. I mean, I think that's the crux of the matter, because then that gives you an opportunity for more fluid expression. Everything's sort of boom, 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 boom. You can't get that. You can't start. Well, the funny thing is you can't really relate to what was happening at the music at the time, because the curious thing is, although people argue this thing backwards and forwards, which came first, the music or the dance, it really seems to me that both of them were making their own independent developments at the same time. So the musicians were moving towards 4 beats to the bar, at that time, and the dancers were moving to 4 beats at the bar. And that's really what, and I think it's the locking together of those 2 developments that, produced the, such extraordinary developments.
I see. What was the prevailing dance at the time? What was it? Was it a Charleston competition? What type of competition?
Yeah, they were doing everything. Charleston tango, waltzes, different sorts of collegiate shag. They do everything. And the Lindbergh hop. Don't forget that. Although, excuse me. Nobody quite knows what the Lindbergh hop was, unfortunately. What we do know is that it's being talked about, it was being danced, and it was being talked about at least up till 1929. So it was still being danced as a separate dance from the Lindy hop, which first got its name in September 1928. So they were running in parallel for at least a year. Quite why the Lindbergh hop disappears and the Lindy carries on going, I know that's one of those probably going to be one of those unanswered questions. We should have started asking these questions some years before. But people who Marshall Stearns interviewed, like Leonard Reed, and someone Bob Crease interviewed, like Alfred Legans, both of them said quite clearly in interviews that they were 2 separate dances. So there were, there were quite a few dances, So you'd do the slow drag for slow ones. Rumba started coming in about 1930, not quite at this time, but just slightly afterwards, They had a waltz night at the Savoy when it opened. On Monday nights was waltzing night,
And what was the dance that Shorty George and Marty Purnell?
Something between a collegiate shag and the Limburg hop.
So that this was the dance that they were doing.
Yeah, and that's what makes me think that the Limburg hop was not just another name for the Lindy hop. Because if it had been, you would think, well, why did it cause such a big stir? You see, and that's really why I disagree with that other general argument or general belief that somehow the Lindy just morphed out of the Charleston. Because, again, if it did that, why did it cause such a huge stir? Why was there so much interest in this new dance that suddenly, mushroomed up almost out of nowhere?
Talk to me about that. I mean, how was that visibly, like, how was that in the historical documents? Why do you know there was so much interest? I mean, you had this competition where there were newspaper articles. Can you talk about, like, in your research, why this was, this happened, how it happened, why it was a phenomenon, and then what happened?
Well, I'm still sort of working on the whys and wherefores of it, but I can say sort of, I'd rather talk about things I could talk about definitely, rather than just sort of conjecture. But what we do know is that Snowden was immensely popular as a result of this, suddenly emerged as a major dancer on the Harlem scene. They had a sort of, they did all sorts of things, to keep the interest going during a dance marathon. Dance marathons were a bit like soap operas at the day. You had to keep injecting little extra things into them and stories, so like there was a fake marriage in it, and people went off down to City Hall to get, and Snowden and his partner were best groom and, best man and best woman, best woman for it and that sort of thing. And one of the things they did was they'd have, so celebrities would come in and say, here's $20 for the best waltzer. So they'd all, away they'd go, they're waltzing their backsides off, And then another time they'd actually had voting, and the voting about 2/3 of the way through the marathon, Snowden and his partner were like 2,000 votes. The next nearest person to them was about 1,000.
Give us the context for how this moment in history happened. Where was Shorty George Snowden? What was the contest? Who was he beforehand? What happened during the contest, or the marathon, I'm sorry. And then...
Well, George Snowden was, I think, to me, is quite important. He was a New Yorker, born in New York, and... whereas a lot of the other people weren't, increasingly that became the pattern, obviously, as the years passed, more and more of the whitest Lindy hoppers, were born in New York. But quite obviously, for instance, Frankie wasn't, Leon James wasn't, Al Mims wasn't, and so on. Snowden was a New Yorker, and his mother was born in New York as well. His father wasn't, but so... It seems to me that if we're saying that this is a dance of the North and he played an innovative role in it, it's important to say that, and that's where he originated as well. So he wasn't really tapping into, he could have indirectly been tapping into rural roots, because people came from the South ultimately, but one could also say that he was already well established as part of the, you might say, the New York's historic black population. So he was really talking, I would say, or talking in the sense that dancing is talking about the city, and about city life and so on. And he was, interestingly enough, a roller skater, someone who was used to fast movement, all the rest of it, broke his ankles at quite an early age, was told he would never dance, or could never do anything like that again. And, it was the old Rocky story again, he just worked and worked at it, and got his act together and became a pretty fast dancer. He went to a reform school at one point, up in Riverdale, near there. I don't know what for, but he was definitely there in the 1920 census, that's where he was. Street life seemed to save him, because street life in Harlem at that time had a lot of positive qualities to it. People looked out for each other. People weren't just trying to, sort of con you out of whatever little you had. people would be quite supportive in that sort of thing, and he definitely seems to have rallied round, got a regular job. So he was there when the Savoy opened, already an avid dancer, Charleston dancer, very proud of the speed with which he could dance. And so when this marathon was organised downtown at Madison Square Gardens, and they wouldn't let black competitors enter for it. And they organised one uptown. A rival one was organised uptown, to give Harlemites a chance. Snowden went to Charles Buchanan, of the manager of the Savoy, and said he wanted to dance on behalf of the Savoy, and Buchanan said no, he didn't want anything to do with it. Buchanan did agree to sponsor a hostess, one of the Savoy hostesses, to dance in it, but not Snowden. So Snowden entered actually on behalf of the Jolly Fellows, Whitey's Club, and there's a picture of him, with the Jolly Fellows sash afterwards, and he's entered officially on behalf of the Jolly Fellows, and he was just, extraordinary. What is, I think. Do you want me to go into that thing about the dance again?
Yeah.
Well, basically, he was. People were pitching it in all sorts of ways. No, because this is sort of like new territory. Although we tend to take dance marathons for granted now, people know about them. The dance marathon then was, fairly. It was new to Harlem. It had been taking place elsewhere. It was a weird craze. That particular craze had started off in England in about 1923, come across to America and picked up in America, and then it got spread from city to city. New York wasn't even the first, and. So Snowden himself, with his partner Matty Parnell, I have no idea how they met, but this is with the girl he danced with in it. They were doing the latest dances, and they basically had a bit of an accident, and they were doing a thing called the breakaway, which is where on the guy's right side and the woman's left side, they sort of swing out a bit as far as they can without letting go, and then back together again, like you might say a swinging door. And at a certain point, either she lost his grip or he lost her grip. Perhaps it was both of them. She spun away from him. He grabbed her and pulled her back in, and at the same time did a few fancy steps while he did it. And everybody thought it was deliberate, and went crazy over it. So that they thought, "Wow, we have something here," and they did it again. And then that became their speciality. There's no evidence at that point. Someone asked him what he was doing, and he said it's a Lindy Hop. That the name didn't get used till the following September. That's the first identifiable point that I've found for using the name. So this happened in other words, a recap in June, and it wasn't until 3-4 months later it became the name first got used. So. But Snowden and his partner were incredibly popular in the marathon. There was a poll 2/3 of the way through it, and he came out twice as popular as the next couple to him. Other people, you see, were playing it safe in the marathon. They were just trying to do the minimum and get through. Snowden wasn't. Snowden was out there to be flash, to make an impression, and he was really giving it everything he could. And they made it through to the end, and... very, very rapidly things started moving for him. It caused quite a big sensation. People wanted to see this dance. And it seems as if that originally people thought the dance was too complicated for ever to be done socially. People saw this as a performance thing, which again is a bit of variance with a lot of current swing thinking, where people think it came from, it evolved as a social dance and became a performance one. The evidence tends to suggest it's the other way around, because I've been just trying to read original accounts and check things, not surmise stuff into it,
So what happened from there? There was this, and did the newspapers come? What happened? How did it get on the radar screen?
Yeah, unfortunately, the Evening Graphic covered it, and this is according to Marshall Stern's book. Walter Winchell and Ed Sullivan were down there quite regularly. and cheering on number 7, which of course was Snowden. That was Snowden's, you know. But unfortunately, the copies of the Evening Graphic, they don't have them. And in the, you know, like New York Public Library or stuff like that. Now,
the Evening Graphic is what?
well, it was the, I think it was the evening paper of the Daily Graphic. And Walter Winchell had actually kept scrapbooks from everything he ever wrote. And unfortunately, when he died, it was all auctioned off. So someone's got those, probably got those things somewhere. But I mean, it would be quite a job to track it down as to who bought that particular item, you know. It's such a shame, you know, that collection should have gone to a library. Major collection of Americana, you know, was just allowed to drift, you know.
And so what happened after that night? What happened after that night with the Lindy Hop? This great sensation that was started.
Well, it's hard to fill in those sort of gaps because you got very little testimony, but the name just keeps coming up every now and then. But the big thing seems to have happened in the following September when it becomes, he gets into the Lincoln Theatre and the Lafayette Theatre performing the Lindy Hop, and then it emerges on stage, and the Lindy Hop Review, you know. So I think it's, I can't remember which one it was, but I think it's when he did the Lafayette, and you saw, you actually see, those are the dancers that he sees, you see in After 7, you know, the film, the Duke Ellington, not the Duke Ellington, you know, the film, the dance clip, After 7 and Shorty Snowden. But my gut feeling is that that is not representative. For whatever reason, which I don't really know, they'd almost gone backwards. You know, they were almost like trying to show the roots of the Lindy Hop in that thing. So it was very Charleston orientated. They even had to do the cakewalk, isn't it? And of course, and Snowden is not dancing with his original partner in there. That's a new partner in there. That's not the girl who won the marathon with in that particular clip. My feeling is they'd already sussed out the swing out, and they obviously don't swing out. In that they do the breakaway, they do the Charleston, they do all these other things in it, but they don't do a proper swing out in it, you know.
And what happened with the popularity of the dance? What happened with the Lindy Hop? When did you start seeing it appear?
Very soon after that, it spread like wildfire.
And at what year? So talk to September.
End of 28 into 29, downtown as well. People were dancing the Lindy all over the place. It just suddenly spread like, none of the dance teachers would teach it. It just, people were teaching it to each other. They went along to the ballrooms, they watched people doing it, say, hey, I want to do that, you know, and they were doing their own version of it. There's one clip of people dancing, and I think it's at the Rockland Palace, where it looks to me as if they were trying to recreate the original thing where Snowden was dancing. And you see they're doing some very odd things there, you know. I mean, it's not really like the Lindy Hop as we know it now. Or we know it even shortly after that, you know. But I mean, they called it Lindy Hop at the time, and I think that was filmed in either 1929 or the beginning of 1930, that clip. And but all sorts of, you know, sliding on the floor. It's a very weird collection. I really need to get a good copy of that, you know, to sort of try and look at it more carefully, what they're actually doing, you know, so we can make sort of sense of it, you know, in terms of the overall story.
Describe if you were to tell the story as a phenomena, you know, from that point up until the 1940s, you know, up into the war. That moment was a seminal moment in this dance. It was sort of the point where you could almost credit it as the birth of the dance. Talk to me about, you know, you started to touch on this, but if you could just walk us through in a very basic way, you know, how it started, what happened next, who started, what was the surge of popularity, what was the fall in popularity, what was the resurgence of popularity, and just walk us through that, you know, chronology from that point until the war.
The Snowden and his dancers and that still seem to stay on the wrong side of Charlie Buchanan, you know, manager of the Savoy. They had a difficult relationship, you know, and I don't think they ever quite forgave each other for what happened in the first place, you know. So, in a sense, I think that's where that was the big opening for Whitey's Lindy Hoppers. So, although Snowden's dancers were performing professionally outside the Savoy, they would, you know, perform reluctantly inside it, when they wanted to make a point, look how good we are, sort of thing. Which was really the opening for Whitey, because then he started recruiting a new generation of young dancers who were willing to perform inside the Savoy and do what they were told to do. So, in other words, they would go out and pretend to be social dancers, but they were really performance dancers, dancing in front of where the VIPs sat, and in the booths and so on. And then, really, what happened with the dance itself is that Whitey's Lindy Hoppers, sort of smoothed everything out. Whereas before, earlier dancing, they would just sort of break away and do all sorts of other things, as you see in After Seven. They started making the whole thing much smoother, flowing dance, in its more recognisable form. And of course, it just became incredibly popular. I mean, there were times when they thought the Lindy would die away, like after the Wall Street crash in 32, 33, and people thought, oh, look, it's all going to be Latin from now on. But suddenly the Lindy came back with a bang. It just caught the mood of the New Deal. About people doing things for themselves and pulling themselves out the mess the country was in. So, well, I'm trying to think what to say from there. It's quite a complex history, you see, from there to the war, Okay.
Well, we'll leave that off for now.
Yeah.
I'll get to some other questions. Yeah. But I guess one question that I do have is, can you talk a little bit about your evolution? Because, what Shorty George was doing, he was a competition, he was dancing in a competition, but to a certain degree that wasn't a scripted dance, that was a social dance to a certain degree, right?
Well, not my definition, not if you're dancing for an audience.
Okay. So can you talk?
Because, what you see, a marathon, you've got to remember, a marathon paid for itself by people buying tickets to come in and watch.
Yeah.
So basically you always had an audience there.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was the whole, so the guy who was running it obviously hoped that he made enough money so he could give people the prize and still finish up with a profit after he paid for everything else. So one of the things about the marathon was you had to keep on getting people to do things to entertain the audience.
Yeah.
Because, let's face it, a marathon was just boring.
Tell me about how the dance, in your understanding of the dance, how did it emerge as a social dance? And, because 1928 is the first evidence of, in your research that this sort of happened. And then when did it begin as a social dance?
29, about a year later. I mean, it just became incredibly popular, Unfortunately, definitely some people were teaching it. There's evident various people are out there. Alfred Liggins himself, he broke away from Snowden. He felt the Lindy should go. He felt the Lindy should go towards social dance rather than towards performance. So it started off really as a competition dance, which is not quite the same thing as performance. It's not social dance, you know what I mean? Because you've got everyone's vigorously competing with each other, to try and out-dance each other off the floor, which is just not social dancing. But on the other hand, they weren't integrating or harmonising their choreography or stuff like that, which is what you tend to get in performance. So Liggins felt that the dancing should they should move towards a more sort of like a less showy, more graceful, integrated, smoother form of dance, whereas Snowden in fact took it in the other direction. They went for more spectacular and messing around, with early air steps and stuff like that, So there were definitely people who could see there was possibilities in it, there's a guy called Max Dinnett, and I think there are other people around as well, and they were all teaching Lindy, especially to the whites who were coming uptown and wanted to learn it, And so my guess is that they played quite a role in formulating it as a social dance. And also, don't forget with the Savoy itself, the hostesses would have played quite a role in here, because one of their jobs was to learn the latest dances and then teach them to people who'd come in, So they would say, right, once people are asking what they want to learn the Lindy Hop, they'd learn the Lindy Hop. So who knows? Maybe the Savoy hostesses played quite a role in that, because that was their heyday.